Eyewitness News.
Thank you very much, Mr. Umaru.
It is not usual to be hearing someone as high ranking as Chief of Army Staff to be making the statements that we've just heard, is it? I mean, I am finding it a bit intriguing.
Well, once again, thanks for having me. And let me say, as I've done previously, that I happen to be what we call the course commander of the Ghana Military Academy Intake 26, that Major General Tom Oppong-Peprah and some other colleagues, about 7 of them currently in the armed forces, belong to. So that's a backdrop, suggesting that I know him a bit, well, because in 1986 I was their course commander. Now, he has responded to quite a range of issues with several undertones. And my personal opinion is that, given that whatever was written in the media was about him, he's got an emotional attachment to the statement. And therefore, maybe advisedly, he should not have responded. He should have allowed the system, the institution. And I think in this case, the Public Relations Department of General Headquarters to have responded. But he's already responded. And the first point, one of the first points that he made was about the idea that he has declined the offer of being appointed the Chief of the Defense Staff. Now, let me explain that. Being appointed to any position in the Ghana Armed Forces is not an action that can be, forced down on an individual. I myself had an occasion when I was a lieutenant colonel to decline a position that I was being offered. And that was the end of it. I know another officer, I don't think it's appropriate to mention his name, who was a major general, who was being offered this CDS position some years back. And he explained that he wanted to be where he was. So the government or the institution appointed, a new officer. So it's not unusual for any officer to say, thank you very much for what you want to offer me, but I think I'm happy as I am. I want to go home or I want to stay wherever I am. Even the appointment of ambassadors for a few officers who have had the privilege of being offered that position when they had retired, especially as chiefs of defense staff, some senior officers had declined, that they were not interested in the appointment of CDS. So I want Ghanaians to understand that it is perfectly within the rights of Major General Tom Oppong-Peprah to refuse, not to refuse, to decline, assuming that the source of that statement is true. Because I don't know where the media house that published that information got the information from, that the government had or wants to appoint him as CDS, and he, Major General Tom Oppong-Peprah, is not interested. Where did that information come from? So that's one side of it. Then there are some statements, some nuances like shake-up. Where does that come from? Look, periodically, indeed, every year, there are officers who retire, and there are officers who are promoted, and there are officers who are appointed, and there are officers who are posted to certain positions, various positions. It's a normal, it's a routine way of managing the careers of officers. But then periodically, especially when it coincides with the tenure of, let's say, CDS or service commanders, once a service commander moves up or a CDS goes home, another service commander moves in, or maybe some other officer, because it's not always the case that a service commander may become, the new CDS. But once that change starts happening, there's an upward swell where a few individuals keep moving up the apex or towards the apex. And some then will fall off, and then others will move up. But we don't call it shake-up. You see, the shake-up has some connotations as if some earthquake or whatever is about to take place. And it sends the wrong signals, to those who may not know how appointments and promotions are made, in the Ghana Armed Forces. Then there is this idea of people not liking him. Look, every senior officer that I had known since I became, let's say, a major, whether a CDS or Army commander, Navy command, not all of them are liked. And I'm talking of the era of General Kwenu, for instance, or General Tafia, or Air Marshal Dumashi, General Obeng, and, fine officers. But it is not the case that everybody likes them. I hope you get what I'm saying. And there
Yes, I'm
could be a
following.
number of reasons. It could be ethnic, tribal, call it that way. It could be some competition between these officers and some of their contemporaries. That is competition, professional competition, and so on and so on. It could be a whole range of things. It could be some officers that they would have disciplined at some points in time in the careers of other officers. So not being liked or being disliked is again not unusual. It's not peculiar to Major General Oppong-Peprah. Now, being taken to the spiritual people and so on, it's not too long ago that we heard similar statements about the IGP, I think. And I know it happened. When I left the Ghana Armed Forces, under the circumstances that I left, there were officers who came to me. Let me call them officers who were spiritually enlightened, came to me and suggested that the whole thing was spiritual. You see what I mean? So again, it's not peculiar to General Oppong-Peprah that he's been taken to the Juju people or wherever and so on and so forth. But let me end where I started. That because the publication or the story was about him personally, and he's got an emotional attachment to the story, I think, and I stand to be corrected in all humility, that he should not have responded in person, And I don't see how much good he has done to the story by responding himself, to the extent of innuendos like his armor, he cannot be penetrated, and so on and so forth. But one day, when he becomes, or let me say, if he becomes the chief of the defense staff, he's going to work with some of these media houses, and he's going to work with Ghanaians, and he's going to work with the men and women of the Ghana Armed Forces. So it should be conciliatory in tone, rather than pointing fingers and then causing further cleavages, which will not serve him well when he becomes, or if he becomes, the chief of the defense staff.
Listening to him debunk the claim that he has rejected clearly means he is interested in the position, and it would appear someone does not want him to get that job. That's the sense I get. Is that a fair thinking?
Well, I don't know whether he's been called, because you don't go to bed and wake up and then your name is mentioned that you are the new CDS or you are the new chief of the army staff. The normal tradition, what the office of the presidency in that previous statement, the conventions, is that you'll be called and you'll be informed and you'll be invited to become a CDS. And you have the prerogative to accept with thanks and appreciation, or to reject, decline with thanks and appreciation. So it may be that he's been called. It may also be that it's not being called. But of the crop of officers currently, of the rank of major generals, the 7 of them that I mentioned, coming from one intake 26 dating back to 1986, any one of them, all things being equal, could become a CDS. And when I responded to the earlier press statement from the office of the president, which I responded to those allegations that if the CDS incumbent, Admiral Setamwama, goes home, then 2 of his mates will also have to go home, 1 Army and 1 Navy. It's not automatic. It's a question of whether they have reached what we call the ceiling. Because as brigadier generals, if they have not, been moved to the rank of major general by, can be quite precise, but let's say by the age 50 or 60, for instance, then automatically, per regulations, administrative rules and regulations, they will be going home. It is not that anybody is pushing them out of the armed forces. So that is intake 23 that the CDS belongs to, with 2 colleagues that I've mentioned. Then there is intake 24 with 1 officer, who is also a brigadier general equivalent. Then there is intake 25 with 2 other officers who are also brigadier generals. Before you come to this intake 26, which has 7 officers, at least I know that 5 of them are major generals. I'm not sure of the rank of their colleague who is in the Navy, for instance. But I know that 5 of them are major generals as we speak. So any one of them, and any of these 5 that I've mentioned, 2 being the mates of Admiral Muama, all things being equal, could become the new CDS. You see. But even if he's not interested or if he's interested, he shouldn't say that he's interested. He will disclose that to the authorities when he's called. So I see it as a bit of provocation on the part of, segments of the media, to try and preempt some of these procedures or some of these processes. And it's not auguring well, for stability and so on and so forth. Now, I have had occasion to also explain that. Call it animosity about him. Did not start yesterday. You see, we could go back to about 2016. Because at any time that these appointments are to take place, it is not a clear run for one person. Sometimes it's about 2 officers who are most qualified, sometimes even 3. So, at the time that General Dankwa became CDS, for instance, the competition was between him and another officer. And the government decided that General Dankwa will become the new CDS. Then they found a place for, this other officer that I'm mentioning. When, for instance, Admiral Kwashi, the late Admiral Kwashi, may he so rest in peace, before he became CDS, again, the offer was made to another officer, one of his colleagues. Last I suggested, that officer declined with appreciation and thanks. So Admiral Kwashi was appointed the CDS. You see, these are the nuances of these promotions and appointments. Sometimes the problem is that, we don't write, as Ghanaians, we don't write our histories. So very few Ghanaians know about the nuances of professional military careers, or maybe professional police careers, or professional whatever it is. And that leaves a lot to conjecture. So I'm saying that let us wait. Because I've suggested that what the Office of the Presidency wrote in that statement a week or so ago, that when, I said it's not it said if. And I suggested that it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Because obviously Admiral Setamwama is about to leave. You see what I mean? Having spent 3 or so years in that seat, he has to, leave. And then some other officers have to come in. So we've come very far from the days of, should I say, the PNDC, the early days of the NDC, where you could have one officer as chief of the army staff in that position for 5 or 6 years. When that happens, it means that promotions have been stifled. And while the senior officer is holding that position, others below him are being sent home. And it creates all manner of tension. So the normal routine, the natural routine, if I should put it that way, is for those at the top to keep, moving on, so others could have the chance, to be promoted. Because that publication, social media publication that the presidency referred, you recall that they mentioned a number of colonels being frustrated or whatever it is because they are being sent home. Because look, there can only be one CDS who is a lieutenant general. There can only be one, a number of major generals as pertains now. The chief of army staff is one. The chief of staff, who is his mate, is also one. The commandant of the Ghana Military Academy is one. The newly appointed commandant of the National Defense College is also one. There are 5 of them, they are all major generals, plus another one who is with the Border Commission. You say, all 5 cannot become CDS. Only one. And if that one happens to be the chief of staff and he moves up, only one can become chief of the army staff. So when this happens, those 7 officers who are all mates of Major General Oppong-Peprah cannot stay on for another 3 years because they might have exceeded, the age that goes with the rank of Major General. It's a natural procedure. And I think that, the army has been treated very well. We should not bring the army to the level of the police, which becomes too politicized and so on. Well, I'm not saying that there is no politics. I've indicated that politics have always been part of it all the way to 2016. You see, which is one reason why his personality has been attacked the way that it is. I would have wished that he kept quiet and not spoken to the media. Because if all of us had to take to the media to explain the circumstances under which we went home, I'm telling you, the media will not even have space, to take up our stories.
I've spoken to soldiers who say that the appointment of this chief of army staff to the position of CDS would see so many people retire prematurely. You've mentioned the people who have to go. Is it a high number or is a low number? And if it's going to be a high number, would that not be inconveniencing? If there are people senior to him, should they not be the ones who should be promoted and made the chief of defense staff? The conversations have been had.
Well, the exigencies of this issue that we're talking about, I'm suggesting, did not start yesterday. They go back several years. You see, I've mentioned intake 26 with 7 officers who are still in the system, 5 of whom I can vouch are major generals. You see, now ask me, where are those intake 25, intake 24, intake 25, 2 of them are left. Where are the rest? They don't know. Because the 7 officers were promoted, or 5 officers that I can speak to, were promoted major generals over and above them, not yesterday, a few years back. Now, the intake 24, that is left with only 1. Where are his mates? They've also had to go home because these 5 officers were promoted over and above them, albeit that their intakes, per intake, they are senior to intake 26. Then Admiral Seta Muama, who is the CDS, who has 2 of his mates left as Brigadier Generals, right? Where are the rest? And why are these 2 major Brigadier Generals when, CDS Admiral is a Lieutenant General equivalent? So you begin to see that Per the career planning of officers, somebody calculated that intake 26 should be promoted years back ahead of the others, creating a situation where they, by default, per rank, because rank supersedes intake. Intake, I've argued in my book on the Ghana Army or the indigenous African warfare, is only an administrative arrangement because you cannot send one officer to the military academy or any military academy to train. You send a number of them based on human resource calculations about how many officers will be needed in the year or so ahead. But it doesn't mean that because your intake is senior to others, you become senior to them till the time that you, you retire. So there have been several instances where, not even these last 7 or so years, going, several years back, there have been several instances where officers of senior intakes have been, what is the word that we use? They have been, it's not bypassed, but you can say bypassed, overpassed, superseded, whatever it is. It happens. And when it happens that way, for purposes of morale, reasons of morale, well, look, if you Umaru at Citi, let's say you are senior to my good friend Bernard Avle, and Bernard was promoted ahead of you, you might not feel too fine. Your morale will go down. The way you relate to him and other colleagues and the Citi, institution will be affected. So when it happens like that, for the sake of the institution, those officers who have been surpassed, bypassed, overpassed, whatever, will be retired. But when they are being retired, cognizance will be given to the age that goes with the rank in which they are. Because if you retire any officer ahead of time, you need to pay the difference between the salaries at the time that he's being retired and the end of that bracket year. So assuming that a brigadier general can serve up to, let's say, 60 years, let's assume, and that brigadier general is 57 and you send him home, then the government, the state of Ghana, must pay this officer 3 years emoluments. Now, if you have 5 of them, as in this case, it's going to be a huge cost to the national budget. And those were some of the tensions around 2016, when a whole lot of officers, were looking like going home, and that factor kicked in, that the state cannot pay for those remaining years for these officers to go home.
So, for economic reasons, it would be ideal that we choose someone who is higher in rank so that the status quo remains, rather than choose someone with a lower rank and send people home and compensate them.
All things being equal, you joined Citi 10 years ago.
13.
Right? Now, 13 years ago. All things being equal, those who joined 5 years ago should wait. Now, if those who joined 5 years ago are promoted over you, 13 years experience, of course, Citi is not like the armed forces. But in the armed forces, when it happens like that, it's invariably the case that those officers who are being superseded will be going home. You see what I mean? It's a certain, kind of natural sequence of events.
Okay, I get
it. Care should be taken.
Okay.
In fact, let me use this platform because these days AI is becoming, the new technology of choice. I am suggesting that rather than take a piece of paper on which you have a list of 10 officers and you have scores, how old, that kind of stuff. How many years has he spent in the current rank and those. Let's find an AI to take confidential reports, whether they have, and let the AI which will assess the temperament without any emotional attachment and say that, yes, at this point in time, Officer A is the most senior when you put all of these things together. But temperament-wise, he may not be the most suitable. Therefore, Officer B should become the new CDS. Or you build in the service factors. Look, Admiral Setamama is Navy. Before him was my good friend, General Obed Akwa. So when Admiral Setamama is leaving, in all likelihood, another Navy officer cannot become the CDS. So there are three services who need to be given equal attention. So normally Army leaves, and then you bring in Navy, then you bring in Air Force, like that. Not necessarily in that order, but sometimes it doesn't happen that way. You could have, especially because Army officers are normally more in numbers than the Navy and the Air. Maybe you could have a couple of Army officers being CDS and so on. So that is one of the factors.
Okay. What should
then
you
you have the factor of ethnicity. I mean, if your CDS is a Gan, your Army commander is a Gan, your Southern commander is a Gan, immediately you sense that, no, there's something abnormal about this. Because Ghana is not made up of one ethnic group. It's made up of several ethnic groups. So at the point of recruitment or enlistment, you make sure that that enlistment is balanced. It's got all the different ethnic groups of Ghana. And all things being equal, they keep, rising in rank. By the time they become Brigadier General, you have a few Ewes, you have a few Akans, you have a few, Northness and so on. So that it doesn't become like, the Army has become the prerogative or the whatever it is of maybe one ethnic group or whatever.
So that explains why he vehemently rebutted the claim that he is Achim.
Again, you see, it's not unusual. Umaru, I can tell you for a fact that the basic assumption is that when you hear that Umaru is Umaru, you assume that Umaru is NDC, for instance, or that Umaru is MPP. In the worst form of this example, an officer whose wife happened to be still is an Ewe. People were saying that, no, that officer is NDC because his wife is NDC. I mean, Ewe. And therefore, you see what I mean? It is very, very funny. So that is how this argument, pejorative as it is going. That because his wife is Achim, then by extension, even if his allegiance is towards MPP, if you use that factor alone, you see. So I don't know whom we're going to blame.
Okay.
And of course, we know that we should blame the political class.
Actually, that's what I was going to come to next. And in your concluding comment, what should the Jubilee House do now? And must it be done now or later?
Well, whatever the case is, there will be the need to appoint a new CDS and new service commanders, a new, these commands that we've created for the Army. Those officers who were holding defense attachés appointments have come home and they've been replaced. Some may be coming and others may replace. It's a natural cycle. If you delay it too much, then let's go back to the first social media document that was in circulation, that a number of colonels are having to go home. You see, because you have kept certain officers, stagnant at certain positions and eventually blocked the opportunities for these other officers to move up. So the longer you delay, the worse the problem becomes. The government must exercise moral courage, must be very fair, in whom it chooses to become the new CDS and who becomes the new chief of army staff and where the other service commanders and so on and so on are going. I've seen a certain list. I cannot mention that list, but it's part of what is circulating on social media. That we're talking of intake 2026, right? But then you have in that list, a short list of about 5. You have other officers who have been junior to intake 26 being penciled as possible or potential chiefs of defense staff. It creates problems. You see what I mean?
Mm.
To the extent possible, you go as close to the intakes as possible and make sure that in planning the careers of officers, you do it in such a way that at any point in time, there is that equity, that fairness. A couple of days ago, I was having a conversation with a retired officer, I think. Yes. And let me mention the name. He's late. One Lieutenant Colonel J.A. Ankra, a very fine officer. So even me, as a captain, I was called by Lieutenant Colonel J.A. Ankra, who sat with me, in his office, took my folder, and then traced my path where I've been since I left the military academy. So, okay, you are doing well, but as of now, you are not ready to be promoted, or you are not whatever it is to be promoted, let's say a major, if I was a captain, which I think I was. And that, okay, you've been in the training environment for a while, and I think we need to find a way of diversifying your professional background. So maybe we send you somewhere, a headquarters as a staff officer. That is how officers' careers must be planned. It means the officer who is responsible. Well, in the Army, we used to call them MS, military staff. Now I think it's ISEC, Army Secretary, and then Naval Secretary and Air Secretary. They've got the files of all the officers. And when they sleep and they wake up, they must go over the files, plotting the careers of the officers, in such a way that we don't create a situation where we overlook a certain officer. And then we create these kinds of tensions. You say it.
Okay. Let's leave it here for now. Thank you so much for the views.
For
Thank you. That's